Okay. Okay, so welcome everyone to a new edition of our Thank God It's Monday webinar series. Today we're honored to have with us Keith Ferrazzi, the New York Times bestselling author of Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back. Keith is also an executive team coach to some of the most prominent organizations in the world and has recently published Leading Without Authority, a concept which is going to be the central topic of our discussion today. Keith, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the heart of the matter, why don't you tell us a bit about your, let's say, your purpose in life? What keeps you awake? What keeps you awake at night, and how do you translate your inner drive into actions?
Yeah, thank you for that. In fact, it's a timely question because it literally got me up at 4 a.m. this morning, and I couldn't get back to sleep because of it. Look, this has been a passion of mine since I was 8 years old. And that passion has emanated from being born into American poverty from an Italian immigrant family and making a very strong commitment that I would grow up someday and be of service to families who are facing economic disruption because of failed work practices. I'll explain what I mean by that. At the end of the day, I believe that the workplace is a place of transformation for humans. It's a place of transformation for families. And I believe that if we transform how we show up at work, the emanation of that transforms the world. When I was a young man, I wanted to be a preacher. And I realized that today, I have people 5 days a week, not just one. I get to work on the transformation of the human condition and saving families from economic destitution by working on transforming the workplace.
That's really nice. I actually didn't know that side of your story. I guess that's how that's what connects with the concepts of your book, Leading Without Authority. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more what that's supposed to mean. How can a leader lead if he has no authority over his team? Because that's what leaders do, right? I mean, they're supposed to tell people what to do, and that requires authority. So what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, there is plenty of leadership with authority today. And I believe that it limits both the leaders and it limits what's possible, both for the individuals who believe that they don't have sufficient authority and have to wait until they do. If the young people in this world, the people coming up through organizations, thinking that they have to wait for leadership permission. The second concern I have is a world where people look for gathering more authority who are already leaders because they want to be transformational in the world, but they feel they can't do it until they're more and more powerful so that they can be powerful enough to really lead big change. The reality is that those two traditional forms of leadership will leave the world unchanged. They will leave your dreams mediocre. The reality is that work today, dreams, aspirations, conscious capitalism, aspirations of transformation of an organization or of a movement are created when individuals dream well outside of their authority and enlist people as peers to co-create solutions that were not available to them before. Every great movement leader, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, these individuals had no authority to transform. They led without that authority through the practice that I believe, and there's a word that I've created for the sake of this form of leadership. It requires co-elevation. Co-elevation is when somebody is committed to a mission, but their style of leadership enlists a group of people also committed to that mission, but equally as committed to each other. The commitment to a mission isn't sufficient to lift a group up, but a commitment to a mission and each other is enough to lift people up to be fundamentally transformative in the world of leadership today. So what I'm suggesting is traditional forms of leadership will not allow you to be transformative. And in the marketplace today, in the world today, the world needs transformation.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, when you talk about co-elevation, it's basically the combination of collaboration, what supposedly it's all that work is all about, right? But also beyond work, beyond collaboration, you are talking about using or collaborating in a way where everybody is committed to elevate or develop each other. I think that's what I understand.
Exactly. Co-elevation is collaboration plus co-development.
Okay, so could you? I guess this didn't come out of nowhere. I guess since you've been working in this arena for a long time, that's something that you've learned from your own experience. Could you bring this a little bit down to earth with practical examples so we can actually see how this translates into day-to-day life of businesses and people working together? What have you seen?
I'll give you a few. The turning point of General Motors when it was coming out of bankruptcy, the same people, many of the same people with the same strategies that had led General Motors into bankruptcy. It was when that group of people committed not just to the mission of the salvation of General Motors and the serving of its customers, but it committed to do it in a partnership with dealerships, in a partnership across divisions and silos in the organization. When Mary Barra led that organization in a co-elevating fashion, going higher together, that was a pivot point to the transformation of the organization. There's a gentleman named Mark Royce inside of General Motors who did extraordinary things at the time with the dealership community and the North American organization that became a tipping point. Today, I'm working with an organization, it's an insurance company called Aflac, where one group within the company that is a group that nobody would have thought of being an agent of transformation, the call center. The call center where people are calling in from the customers, the sales force, et cetera, to resolve issues. That group stepped above their role and looked across the organization and said, we can't do this without significant partnership with other parts of the organization like sales, et cetera. And they began to invite parts of the organization in to create a solution that would be not just transformative within the boundaries of what they controlled, but transformative for the customer and for the sales organization overall. And that was the tipping point of transformation. We have to step above our areas of organization, authority, and org charts and control, begin to see the bigger picture and enlist a greater co-creation to do that, to make that happen.
Okay. When I was just thinking, when we posted the other day the announcement of this webinar on social media, somebody actually commented, is it the title of the webinar was Leading Without Authority, and somebody actually asked, is it possible to lead without leading? And I'm not 100% sure of what he meant by this, but I have this sense that deep down, this is sort of the underlying idea behind your philosophy, then more than relying.
No. I mean, I think that the beauty of that question was an assumption of what leading was. And the assumption of what leading was is wrong. It's dead. And I want to bury it, and I want to give its appropriate respect for the life that it lived and that it served us in an era through the Industrial Revolution. It served us into the world that we were living to today. But unfortunately, for the last 20 years, it's been on life support. The last 30 years, it's been on life support. And there's a number of us that, you know, with all intensive respect for what it was, has been wanting to pull the plug and let it pass. And that question of, is it possible to lead without leading, means that, is it possible to lead without being authoritative, without being controlling, without being directive? And the answer is, we have been being that. Work today happens in networks. Extraordinary work happens by people who can marshal networks outside of their control. So I wrote a book a number of years ago called Never Eat Alone. It's been a global best-selling business book, Never Eat Alone. And it's about you building your networks. And it's about you recognizing that, like me when I was a child, if I had no nepotism available to me, if I had no resources, if I had no money, if I had no relatives who'd even gone to college, right? I had to build a network in order to create opportunity for myself. You, as a leader today, have to look outside of what you can control, what resources you have, and you need to begin to build a network that allows you to transform the world around you in your business, in your company, and with your customers and with your vendors and your suppliers. You need to have a networked approach to work. And Leading Without Authority, the book that I've written, and the principle of co-elevation, is the book that teaches you how to lead in this new fashion that we have been calling for, that we have been desiring, that we've been needing, that the best leaders have been using for 30 years. But it's time to punctuate the death of the old and the recreation of the new.
That's definitely going to make the headlines. Leading is dead. The old way of leading is dead.
Leading is dead. Co-elevation. Leading is dead, and co-elevation is the new leading.
Let's talk a bit more about this, about leadership. I think in a way, leadership could be defined as the art of decision making, because leaders are the ones that get to decide what path to follow, what is it that they consider the right course of action. That's been traditionally the way. But now, much in line with what you're saying, there's a growing trend in the world of business to think that collective intelligence is wiser than individual intelligence when it comes to critical decision making. And there are movements like sociocracy and holacracy, which is a branch of sociocracy, which seem to point in this direction and are gaining momentum. Are your findings consistent with this drive towards a deeper sense of democracy?
Well, a deeper sense of inclusion. And I want to be clear. What the word democracy in a business context, I am fearful that by its application, people might feel that consensus is required.
Yeah.
And it is not. What is required is a radical inclusion of bold inputs. I want all of the voices to be loud and strong and powerful and curious. And then I want equally as bold and articulate decision-making that sometimes does not acquiesce to every point of view.
That's a very important point.
It's a very important point. It's a very important point because it's important that bold decisions still remain and risky decisions still remain, and that individuals who can make that. But the question is, how are they informed? Are they informed by fully inclusive voices that are heard? And we're in a world today where diversity is at the forefront of many dialogues, and not just diversity of race and sex and sexual orientation and all of these things, but instead we're talking about those and diversity of point of view. And are all of those being brought to the forefront with bold input so that equally bold decisions can be made?
Right. Yeah. And I think that it's, I wanted to emphasize what you said before about democracy, because democracy is connected with majority voting. And I think that's starting to become an obsolete model in a way, because obviously when there's a community and 51% of that community vote white and 49% vote black, that means that 49% are screwed with the decision of the other 51. So that means that there's a significant part of almost half of the community is not very happy with that. So in fact, these movements like sociocracy or holacracy are very much in line with what you were explaining before. It's more about hearing everybody's voice than to actually
co-creation.
doing right. Because in fact, they don't use the word consensus. They use the word consent, which means that everybody has to not be completely in agreement, but at least there must be no major objections. As long as there are no major objections, everything is fine, and then we can move ahead with that decision.
Yeah.
And actually, the principle that they use in sociocracy is good enough for now, safe enough to try. As long as we can move ahead. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just in chapter 4 of the new book. I explore the social contract of a group of individuals coming with different points of view, trying to achieve a bold and collaborative output. And Tony Hsieh from Zappos, as you know, is a hero of the holacratic leadership model and its evolution. He has gone beyond holacracy into many more practices that you could research of Tony's. And his point of view of the principle of co-elevation is that independent of what model you choose, you still need an emotional and humanistic social contract that breeds empathy and that breeds care and concern for each other. Because otherwise, the principle of throwing people together to debate a point of view could easily disperse into antagonism. It could disperse into resentment. I have a continuum that I talk about in the book between where we traditionally have been, which is coexistence, and where I want us to be beyond collaboration to co-elevation. And what happens though, is when people try that, they often slip into resistance and resentment if the personal connection isn't there. And this is why it's so important to be both committed to a mission, which is the outcomes. And you could be committed to a mission and strong points of view, and then you could move into resentment, which basically holds you up from progress, unless you also have a commitment to each other. The empathetic relationship is an important element that needs to be, leaders need to infuse, leaders need to foster, leaders need to nurture the relational element of a team to achieve, because there's a lot of hurt feelings. There's a lot of triggered mindsets that happen in this sense of bold debate. The relational element is so important, which is why I've become an expert of this, is all of my books have been around the relational and collaborative sciences in the workplace.
Right. So somebody could say, yeah, this sounds great, but I can see how you could implement this in a small organization, but it's very hard or almost impossible to implement in a large one. So what does it take to lead co-elevating teams, large co-elevating teams?
Yeah. So it takes a leader. It takes a leader.
It takes one leader.
It takes one leader to begin to decide to co-elevate and enlist others. You know, I'm working with a company now that needs to fundamentally, well, I'll give you an example of a company. I'm not going to say the name of it. It's a sophisticated technology informations products company. It's a Fortune 500 organization. The leader came into the organization and there were silos of marketing, content, data, technology. They all had their own leaders. And they were all leading a pre-existing product, but they needed to reinvent the product because the competition was radically underselling them for a better product. Cheaper, better is what the competition. They needed to reinvent the product. They failed to do so for 5 years. This leader came in, worked with us at Ferrazzi Greenlight to introduce co-elevation at the top. And this is on our website. If you go to our website, you can see this leader. His name is Bob Kerrigan. And what Bob realized was that he needed to create a co-elevating team at the top with a commitment to the mission, but also this team committed to each other. What was interesting about it is that any one of the leaders, it was actually the head of human resources. I just mentioned all the areas that needed to be reinvented. It was the product, the technology, the marketing, the data, all of them, but it was the head of HR that was the tipping point of the transformation, because they chose to stand up and make the bold move to lead this co-elevating movement, the head of HR. So it doesn't matter where you're from. Any one individual can recreate and reconstitute the mindset of a small group of individuals banded together to reinvent an organization. And I've seen this at General Motors. I've seen it at Parsons, which is a wonderful large aerospace company in the United States that went from a private company to public, and then adding 20 digits to its sale, to its share price because of this philosophy. It works. It works. It works. Zappos and what it did with being able to sell to Amazon.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. Let me switch gears a little bit here, because I see that we are close to the end of the session. I want to open up questions to the audience. While you send us your questions, I want to ask you two more questions before. One of them has to do with the current situation. Everybody says that great crises always hide great opportunities. And I would like to see if, from your point of view, looking into the future of work, you see a connection between what's happening today, this COVID-19 crisis, and everything we've been discussing today.
Absolutely. I see today as the great disruptor. We have been inking along with a desire and a need to transform the workplace. We've been working in networks since the 80s and 90s, where the matrix of work has been present, but we've been clinging to old ways of working for too long. Today, we wake up in a new world of work, and I am working very hard to assure that we do not go back to work, that we go forward to work. I've started an initiative, Go Forward to Work, and we'll be launching our website this week. And so just follow me, please, and follow this initiative. I've got hundreds of executives who are committed to using this as an inflection point to redefine the future of work. And conscious capitalism integrates into this. And I want to mention something about conscious capitalism before we leave. It's both an invitation and an indictment that I'd like to challenge the viewers about. But come and join me in the rebooting, in the resetting, in the great reset of work, because going forward to work needs to be different. There's a website called virtualteamswin.com, that a lot of my thinking had been placed recently, and also at the Keith Ferrazzi website. But I invite you into a co-creation of the future of work with me.
I love that concept, going forward to work as opposed to going back to work. We'll definitely share the details of that website with our audience later on when we post the webinar on YouTube. Before I open up the round of questions for our audience, there's one question that was asked to you a few weeks ago by the person who introduced us to you, who invited you, actually, who nominated you to be here today, who's Susan Sobot.
I love Susan.
She basically was wondering, in a world, in an increasingly remote world like today, she said she would like to ask you, how do we maintain intimacy in our work environment and relationships when we're all going virtual?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, do I get a chance to address the conscious capitalism overlap to what I'm doing at some point?
Yes, that's the last question, and I'm definitely going to ask.
I'm glad I'm going to do it. So coming back to Susan's question, the answer is the same way we've needed to do it for some time in a remote world. And this is where, please go to virtualteamswin.com, virtualteamswin.com. In a remote world, everything has to be more purposeful than serendipitous. In a remote world, you need to take the intimacy that you might have created when you left a meeting, walking with each other to your desks or down to the luncheon, or around the block to have a bite of lunch together. That intimacy, that vulnerability, that connection, that commitment of the relationship needs to be shaped and formed purposefully. And you can do that as a leader. If I were to say today that my greatest struggle right now in life is my older boy, who I got at 16 from the foster care system, who is struggling with making the right choices. And in this post-COVID world, it's not easy for him. And I'm trying to hold him accountable, and I'm struggling to be the kind of father that I need to be for him, and not be enabling, but in the same regard, to still try to support him as best I can. And I don't know where to draw the line. And I'm struggling with this. Now, I shared that with you purposefully because it's truly where I am, and it's been a part of my weekend. It's Father's Day in the United States, and I haven't felt I've earned that with him. And I share it with you purposefully because I want to build empathy and openness of understanding between us, so that we can go on and you can trust what I'm saying in other ways. Now, that was purposeful. It doesn't make it fake. It makes it critical, so that we build that psychological safety. I give just as an example. Okay,
very good. So we have 2 questions from the audience. Let's take those, and then we'll go with a question about conscious capitalism and your closing statement. How does that sound?
All in. I'm looking at my time. All in 2 minutes. I'm not sure we'll be able to do it, but we'll see what we can do.
Okay, so if you want to do it the other way around, then, just to make sure that you get to make your message.
Well, look, here's my message of conscious capitalism. I believe in the vision of conscious capitalism. I always have. I live my life believing that the workplace is a place of purpose, and that we can reinvent the world through the workplace. Where I have personally struggled by receiving conscious capitalism as my North Star is a sense of judgmentalism. And I don't believe, look, I understand the earnest importance of conscious capitalism, but for us to be able to change the world of capitalism to become more consciously centric, more purposeful, right? We've got to approach it not from a sense of superiority. We've got to approach it not from a sense of being right. We've got to approach it from a sense of invitation, of willingness to co-create. We may be 5 yards near, ready to cross the finish line, but we've got to look back, and we've got to be empathetic and desirous of going back and bringing people with us. That's true of leadership today, and that's true of what we want in the world today. But throwing stones at people and telling people they're wrong, I don't believe is the right answer to be the kind of movement leaders that we need to be. And I have often felt intimidated by the righteousness of those who wear the brand of conscious capitalism. And I feel the need to be much more empathetic and co-creative as we move forward, because I'm still figuring it out.
Well, it will be very interesting to stay in touch and talk further about these thoughts. Do you have a couple more minutes to ask a couple of questions, or you have to go?
Sure. And I know I've got another webinar that is waiting for me, but yes.
Okay, so very quick, Berta, can you just quickly transfer the questions for?
Yes, we have one asking, let's say I'm a leader that wants to co-elevate my current team. What are the first things I need to do? And what are the prerequisites for it to be successful?
You need to first do something that I describe in the book as recontracting. You've got to work with your team, and you can go to virtualteamswin.com and go to the resource page, and there is a script on how to do that recontracting process. But it's about identifying that there are 8 attributes of a high-performing co-elevating team, and you need to go through that with your team and agree in a very candid, transparent way whether they agree to recontract their social contract. For instance, will that team utilize the team itself for its innovation? Right now, 71% of people who are on teams do not believe they get their innovative inspiration from their teammates. 74% of people on teams do not believe that they can challenge each other in the room. You have to recontract your team. And then once you've recontracted your team, you need to go and start a set of practices, which are delineated both on the website and in the book, that help you start living the recontracting agreement.
Great. And last one was, does people change? Are traditional leaders able to change their mental models to lead in a different way? And
Absolutely.
how can we influence on their consciousness?
By dialogue. By dialogue. This recontracting process brings an awakening and awareness, but it's through co-creation. Again, it's not through training. Understanding isn't sufficient to transform behavior. Coaching, experiential, getting people to realize there is a new way that's better. And yes, people can change. I see people change all the time. I've studied organizations like the 12-step programs, which the Dalai Lama says is God's greatest gift to humanity in the last 200 years, where people go from being in the gutter as alcoholics to transforming their lives and getting back on a straight street. And why? Because they show up in co-elevating groups in rooms one day at a time, committed to each other. I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review about how transformational leadership and writing yourselves from old addictions that need to be rewritten have amazing parallels with each other.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Keith. It's been wonderful interviewing you, and I'm sure our audience has enjoyed it as much as I have.
Well, and I really do. I invite you into this journey with me. Please stay in touch. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, on social media, on my website. I'm desperate to have the conscious capitalism movement co-creating with me. How do we use this inflection point to go forward to work with different and unique practices? So come along on the journey.
Let's take this conversation aside. Send me the websites if there's any particular. You mentioned one before. I don't know if that's the only one or there's something else, so we can share it with our audience, and we'll definitely follow up on this. Thanks a lot, Keith.
Thank you.
And also thank you to all our audience. As usual, we will post this tomorrow on YouTube, and you will be able to follow it offline. And other than that, I hope I see you next Monday as well, where we'll be hosting our last TGI for this session. We'll be taking a break over the summer, and we'll be back in September. Thank you very much, and see you next Monday.